In today's episode of Notable, I am talking to Bailey Gamberg, an individual on the road to board leadership who discussed their journey with me exploring their disability identity and advocating for themselves and others to leadership as a person currently outside of the traditional board and executive leadership structure. Come join our conversation. What is your favorite movie or book or song of the moment right now?
Ooh,
It's a hard
okay.
one.
So I don't know if favorite is tough. That's hard to nail down. But
Yeah.
something I've been liking that I've been reading recently is right now I'm in the middle of a book called The Story of Art Without Men. And
Oh.
so it is basically a look at, kind of art history as a broad scale, but going back to like, Renaissance and like ancient China and like kind of these, old centuries ago art movements that are almost primarily tied to male artists.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at some of the women that were part of those movements or contributors as well. And so there's like more and more as you get into the 1900s and like contemporary art and stuff. But it's really interesting because it doesn't talk about any of those like male artists at all, and just focuses on like the women and their contributions to the movement. So that's been really cool. Uh,
Yeah.
to read. I try and read like a nonfiction book that I'm interested in and like a fiction book because I do like to just get lost in like a little, like fantasy world or something like that too.
Mm-hmm.
But I like reading nonfiction and learning stuff that, yeah, like I actively want, to learn more about.
Yeah, and that's such an interesting idea to think about, like reteaching art, like excluding all of the big name. Like if I have to hear about Michelangelo or like Da Vinci or like any of the like big, not Da Vinci. Um, who am I thinking of? Anyway, like any of the like big names that like people think of when they think about art or
Mhm.
science or whatever you like, yeah, I'm going to scream. It's just like not nearly as interesting as like all of the people that never ever got their stories told. Uh,
Yeah, exactly. No, I
yeah.
totally agree. Like we've all heard about those other guys. So like
Yeah.
want to learn something new. My name is Bailey Gamberg and I identify as non-binary and use they them pronouns. I have white skin, short, dark brown hair, a little nose ring. Today I've got on some little dangly earrings, a black and white shirt and a green cardigan. I am in my home office right now, which has my collection of art postcards behind me. I put them up on cork boards and kind of make them like these collagey pieces. So that's part of my space. I'm currently the educator of adult and community programs at the Brandywine Museum of Art. There, I work on programs for adult audiences, working with our community and accessibility as well. But I'm not from the Philly area. I originally grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada, and then attended undergrad in Reno, Nevada, at the University of Nevada, Reno, for English writing and history. I was a big book nerd growing up and thought I wanted to, just wanted to keep doing English stuff. And then I took a museum studies class in history and learned that that was a field that you could go into. And that was something that was interesting to me and did a couple internships. And I was asked a lot if I wanted to be a classroom teacher as an English and history major. And I knew that's not what I wanted to do, but I liked education and I liked learning, but I didn't like the idea of being in a classroom every day with the same students. So I decided I wanted to get my master's in museum studies or museum education. And I ended up going to University of the Arts and moving to Philadelphia in 2018 for their master's in museum education program. So I moved cross country to the city, didn't know anybody, and since then have been kind of making my way through different internships and then different jobs at a variety of museums throughout Philadelphia, from really small places to really big places too. In my free time, I enjoy reading a lot still. I paint and like sketch and draw and collage on the side. I like to dabble in different creative things, lino cuts sometimes. And I'm a big dog lover. I have a little senior rescue dog, so I like taking her to the park and going on nature walks and stuff.
I have so many questions about your dog now, but that that might be an after interview question. Um, okay, thank you for all of that information. You know, it's like it's interesting because it's like I like we know each other, but um I there's still much about your background that I don't know, so it's like nice
Mhm.
to like get to hear it like from your words and kind of get like delve a little more into getting to know who you are as a human. So there's like a few things that I want to touch on, but I do before we get there, I want to ask if you would feel comfortable talking a little bit more about your disability
Mhm.
and your experience as a person with a disability, growing up with a disability, and um, like navigating your experience. You know, you moved from one side of the country all the way to another as a person with a disability. I
Mhm.
know my own experience doing that. I'm originally from California, so like
Mhm.
um
Mhm.
yeah, like
Yeah.
yeah, I'd love to hear about your experience.
Yeah, so I identify as having been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and also phobic anxiety disorder. So I just say anxiety generally. But it was something that I was diagnosed with my senior year in high school. It was something that really came to kind of prominence in my life when I was a senior, which was also kind of during I was moving to Reno to go to undergrad at that point in time. So on the other end of the state, not as far, but still, kind of a big change. And there was something that happened, and I started having anxiety attacks anywhere from kind of 2 to 3 times a day to up to like 12 to 15 times a day. Um, so it was exhausting and really, became a facet of everyday part of my life. And started realizing that this was something that wasn't stable for me, and I needed to try and find some courses of action to try and help with that. So I started going to therapy, um, and did that for a couple years, moved into college doing that. And I remember my freshman year of college, I was really, really dealing with it and missing a lot of events. I wanted to go to social clubs and do new, all the new extracurriculars on campus and stuff like that. And because I was dealing with a bunch of panic attacks and trying to mitigate that and making sure, I was keeping up with my classes and things. And after a couple years, I decided I needed to go on to medication to try and mitigate it more. So I started looking into psychiatry and figuring that out. And thankfully was able to find some medications that worked for me and moving that rate down from at least a handful of panic attacks a day, if not upwards of 10, to having them a couple of times a month, having them, every 2 or 3 weeks, or when something very specific scenario, a very specific trigger came up, rather than just sitting in class and all of a sudden like feeling like the world is going, everything's crashing down in a sense, even though there's not external stimuli that are,
Yeah.
causing that. So getting on medication truly, truly like changed the game for me, and I'm able to be more productive and to be, a bigger person now. I don't know if I would have been able to move across the country. I think if I had, hadn't found the medication and the path that I'm working on, to do so. So yeah, moving across the country, I didn't know anybody in Philadelphia. And for me, I tried to take it on the positive spin as very like a fresh start. There were things I feel like I wanted to leave in Nevada behind and that I wanted to make, really new for myself. Some of that was finding my sexuality and my gender identity and wanting to just like kind of start over in that sense. Um, So I feel like that took away some of the fear for me. Um, and I also feel like going into a graduate school program, I had some social capacity and like the people I was taking classes with. I'm sure many of us relate, like as an adult, making friends is hard.
Oh,
Um,
so hard.
compared to like when you're in school, you're meeting your friends in your classes, you're meeting people in clubs and extracurriculars. And as an adult, it's like you see the people you work with and the people you live with, and everyone else you have to like make the effort to
Mm,
see. So I had thankfully graduate school and a different part-time jobs that I was doing to kind of give me a social base in Philly and a support group to kind of start with. Um, I was also really grateful at the time I had an aunt and uncle living in New Jersey that I was able to kind of like see the only my only family on the East Coast. But I was able to be with visit them and have some sort of family support and understanding there, which was really helpful um for me.
yeah, and like definitely, oh my gosh, I relate to so much of what you said. Like but I mean, I think what you like hit on too is like just the difficulty making friends, particularly if you're someone with a disability too, right? It's like it's not only just like trying to like navigate the um feeling the just sort of social like interactions that are kind of present in regardless of identity, but then also navigating your own access needs and
Hmm.
being able to communicate that to people you're hoping to make friends with, and um sort of navigating that experience of like how is this going to be received? Am I going to
Hmm.
feel safe opening up to this person um about like my identity and what have you? Like I know like that's like that just is like at this added layer of like nuance that gets added to like being a person with a disability trying to make friends and trying to start your life, particularly starting like over and like a fresh start, like
Hmm.
um but I love your perspective on it, the ability to like see it as a fresh start of like I have the opportunity to make a new life and like show up the way that I want to show up. Like I think that is
Hmm.
like huge.
I mean, the pandemic has added to that too. I actually feel like I didn't deal with a lot of social anxiety components before the pandemic. I
Mhm.
was mostly focused on just like in my head, kind of things when things happen. And also my phobia that I deal with, it's gross, but it's when people get sick or like throwing up being
Mm.
sick.
Yeah.
And so at its worst, if someone like burps or coughs or something, my brain starts to think like, oh my
Mm.
gosh, they're gonna get sick. Or if I start to feel like nauseous, which again is a symptom of sometimes when you're anxious, you start to get, like sweaty and like,
Yeah.
kind of nauseous and stuff. My brain starts to think like, oh no, I'm gonna be sick. So for me, that's a lot of like what I deal with, and what the medication has helped me like not think about that every single moment of every day, like just when it's actually happening, maybe, which is rare.
Mhm.
Um, but the pandemic has, I feel like, added a layer for me of social anxiety that I didn't deal with before. It was mostly all revolved around the phobia, but it's becoming more generalized, I think,
Mhm.
for me, just in a capacity that for so long we weren't around crowds and around like a lot of other people. Um,
Right.
and yeah, that kind of changed the game for me and like just my social battery capacity and what I'm able to go to. I mean, I'm still masking and stuff, but not even thinking about it in like a germ, like kind of way.
Mhm.
Just in a being around other people and being in loud spaces and being packed like sardines, somewhere doesn't appeal to me anymore at all.
In this world where the pandemic is not really over, but people are, like in this world sort of post 2020,
Right.
um like how has your relationship to your access needs and the way you advocate for them changed?
Mm. Um, I mean, I feel like just the fact that we are remote and a work from home world has given me more access capacity than I had, before, and so many other people too. Like, I didn't know that asking for work from home days was something I genuinely, truly needed because, like, there's definitely, I have to take off, I have to use PTO, if I wake up and I have an anxiety attack in the morning and I feel like I truly can't, be my best self and be presentable at work. But now you can use the description work from home day. And yeah, I can still answer emails, and work on like some of my writing and my projects, but doing the hour commute and being presentable and being in person with everybody is something I'm not able to accomplish that day. So the flexibility that our world allows now in post 2020 has been huge for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it also in the capacity of accessible programming and stuff too.
Yeah.
Um, to be able to do online talks and things is nice.
Mm-hmm. How has um how has leadership at organizations you've worked for, at whether any of the organizations that you've worked for, how have they been receptive to those sort of um those sort of requests in your
Yeah.
assessments?
I think it's tough. I think there's a little bit of resistance. I think a lot of people want to go, not I don't know how many people, but some people want to go back to all in person. I think some people really think about productivity and the full 9 to 5 office hours. Um, and for me, that's not a work style that's compatible for myself anymore. I've definitely, I mean, I think we've all seen organizations slowly bringing back in person. We were all, remote for a while, and then it became like, let's do one day where we're back in, or let's stagger the days so not everybody's all in together. Um, and kind of, 2 days and then 3 days. So currently I'm on a 3 day in person and 2 day work from home schedule. And that works really well for me, along with additional discretionary days that we can use kind of as is if things pop up. Um, but I remember earlier in the pandemic, maybe in like 2022, when the holiday surges were happening, one of the places I was at was asking people to come back in for 3 or 4 days, like in January, like right after the surge was happening. And yeah, reached out to HR and emailed a director and was like, I really don't think, this is the best time for everybody to be coming back on site as the office team, like, yeah, there's people who have to be there on site as visitor services, like there's some jobs that unfortunately you can't work from home.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky to be in a position that I do work that I can do a lot of computer stuff. But I feel like bringing even more people into the building is not helping those staff who do have to be there.
Mm-hmm.
We're eating in their break rooms, we're walking in their hallways and using their bathrooms. So I was kind of disgruntled by some of that. And I definitely am not in a place where I want to go back full time. And in, my current job and in looking at future job opportunities, that's kind of a requirement, for me now to have a hybrid schedule, whatever that might entail. Um, because I really used a lot of PTO in the past trying to mitigate that kind of stuff. And I want to be able to save, PTO for vacation time, actual time that, you want to be off fully and rest.
I feel like this is the kind of great reckoning that is happening amongst like every single organization right now as we're navigating um this like kind of experience where we're all sort of waking up to the humanity of people,
Mhm.
rather than just viewing the productivity of people, and
Yeah.
like
We're not
and
just cogs in the machine.
exactly, it's like, oh wow, isn't it wild to think about the fact that I'm a human being who, like, sometimes their body just needs rest, and like
Mhm.
that's how you're going to actually get me to be productive, is by respecting and honoring those needs.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, truly wild. Um,
Yeah, 100%. The difference between me and going, if I have an anxiety attack in the morning and still go into work, I'm pretty burnt out like the rest of the day. Like it takes
right,
a toll on you, like, yeah, I'm there physically, but how much am I there mentally,
right. Yeah.
versus if I'm able to, rest, be in a space that's comfortable to me, not use the time commuting, being able to take the time to make yourself some, food, rest in a comfortable spot while you're still, on your computer and answering your emails and working on your project management kind of stuff.
How do you think people in leadership sort of navigate that like feedback from staff and translate it into policy? Is that an experience that you've been a part of?
I have not been a part of an experience where I've been able to like directly change like policy because of that. I feel like there's many scenarios where I'm one of the only person speaking out or
Mm,
people speaking out. And even though there may be people that I'm talking to, in the hall, wherever, in the break room, that they're kind of like, I don't, feel that this is right or this is what that, I want to do. Um, but it can be scary, to send that email and be like, hey, this is how I feel, but here's my feedback on this. Or to go in your one-on-one and be like, hey, this is, how I actually feel about this situation. So I think there might have been scenarios that if I was able to kind of get some more people together to provide their feedback, as the one person giving feedback, it's hard to make a policy change in that kind of sense. I think you need to kind of garner a little more support so that it's seen as a more widespread issue across your institution rather than just a singular complaint kind of thing. Which is why I think, with having a disability, you can feel that way if you're the only person in your institution, who sees this as an access, compromise and as something that is supporting your needs. Um, and I mean, I think work from home days are kind of like I don't know if universal design is the right word, but they benefit everybody in that sense, like even if you don't have a disability, it's nice to change your laundry, on your break and make your own lunch at home,
mm.
kind of a thing.
What do you think the differences could be like amongst leadership receptiveness to those things in the arts industry versus others?
So yeah, I've not worked at a science place, but I've worked at art and history institutions. And I feel like I feel like art institutions can in some way be a little more accepting. Something about working with art and like art, to me, art in itself is like queerness and freedom and creativity, like art is really life-changing and impactful in our true like lived experience in many capacities. And history is too, but I feel like there's a broader movement in art spaces to share more experiences, to share more artists of color and with disabilities and of different identities. Um, I feel like it's sometimes there's so many artists today that identify as such that you can display their artwork and talk about it, that there are some more of these conversations, I think, happening in art spaces sometimes. History spaces are trying to share more stories, of people of color and stuff, but for them, there's so much that has been erased and so much that has not been recorded that it's difficult for them to sometimes find enough information or enough, artifacts and objects on stories to want to display them. So I think art spaces are just being more open and having kind of conversations lately that I think they're a little more, I guess, up to date with what people are talking about and what people are seeking in nonprofit and arts and culture spaces. And what they're seeking is themselves. They want to see reflections of themselves in their own lives and their own experiences. So
Mhm.
you've got to bring kind of a broadness and a diversity to that if you want enough people to relate to your exhibitions.
I wonder if you could speak on any um, experiences you've had where you've been at organizations with leadership that has representation of your identities and if like how that experience has been. if you've had that experience, or if you haven't, I'd love to hear about that experience as well.
Yeah, so I have it, and I mean, a whole thing right now is, neurodiversity being talked about more, that it being seen as a disability in its own status. And the fact that it's a privilege that it's an invisible disability in itself, that I'm able to navigate the world, and have nobody know unless I want people, to know. And in that sense, I navigate a lot of my work life without people knowing. I feel like I only end up this is the first public platform I'm actually like really talking about like my anxiety and like how it's affected my life. I obviously tell like close friends, when people that are in, my personal life, but it's not something that I really like to talk about in the workspace because I'm afraid of, getting shamed for it, or people not caring, or people thinking that I'm like trying to milk attention, or, like extra need, extra stuff, for it or something like that. So I really try and not talk about it in a lot of spaces. And that's something that I actively want to start, changing because of, thinking about representation. I don't know if there's anybody who any in the board spaces, identify as neurodivergent or, deal with anxiety. And I'm sure that there's so many people that do that I'm sure there are. And maybe they, hide it too, or they don't like to talk about it publicly because it's viewed as something negative, and as something that can be a hindrance to your work or your credibility or something. Um, but I want to change that, I want to I'm not on any boards currently, but I'm running for the programming chair position on the Museum Council of Greater Philadelphia Board, which is
Okay.
a professional networking group. Yeah, we do a ton of social stuff, and yeah, bringing people together for behind the scenes tours and to explore different Philly spaces. I've been on the programming committee there now for 2 years, which has been fun. So that's kind of my first, hopefully, breach, into kind of a board, a nonprofit space. And yeah, I want to be someone that it's known that this is a part of my life.
It's scary to be able and say, yeah, this is who I am. This is like all of who I am because of just the way that disability and neurodiversity like gets received in this world. So like
Yeah.
I like thank you. I'll say this like 1,000 times to you, but like I thank you so much for being a part of this. Um
Well, I'm gonna tear up, but thank you for giving me the space to do it. I feel
yeah.
like sometimes that's all it takes, is being asked like the question or being given the opportunity like to speak. I feel this way about my gender identity as well. I didn't start using they them pronouns and gender identity, and being my actual self in the workspace until someday somebody asked me, what pronouns do you want on your badge? Like at a new place, they're printing, badges for people. And I was like, you know what? My pronouns are they them actually. And from that moment on, just kind of came out, I started putting in my email and like letting people know and wearing a little button on my lanyard and stuff like that. But it was just a question I had actually never been asked before, like in my life in the workspace. So yeah, I think it's important to ask questions like that. And even if people's, answers are, no, I don't have a disability, or, I'm cis, my pronouns are she, her, or whatever it may be. Like, you don't know whose answer is different, and that's the first time they've been asked to share, and they might give the truth.
From your perspective, um because I think the concept of like a board of directors um is something that not every person fully understands and knows about, particularly if you're a person from like from a maybe a marginalized community. Um, I know myself, I had no idea what a board of directors did until I started this job.
Mhm.
Um, so like I'm curious to know about your experience learning about what a board even is and how much you know about like in your own words, like what does a board of directors, what role do they play in an organization?
Hmm. I started getting introduced to boards a little bit when I did my first like history internship back in Nevada. I worked at it was half an art center, but also in a historic mansion. So it was half like historic house, half art classes. Um, and I didn't really interact with the board, but I heard my boss talk about them, like you start learning like kind of what it is a little bit. And then I went to grad school and learned a little bit more on kind of like from just like a grant writing and development and like museum history kind of perspective. We didn't go too deeply into, I mean, it's not the most important skill when you're getting right into the field to learn how to be on a board. Like there was
Right.
other I rather learn how to be an educator and a program planner, but I think my first interaction with a board actually was at an internship at Fireman's Hall Museum when I was in grad school. I was lucky to have a paid internship. There was a little like stipend opportunity with it. And because of that, they wanted me to present to the board some of the projects that I'd done because the board had raised money for me to do that internship. Um, and I was lucky that my first experience was at a really small museum because I feel like it was a more comfortable kind of board experience. I think everyone was a little more laid back. Fireman's Hall Museum also has a really direct relationship with Philadelphia's fire department. So a lot of the people on the board are like retired firefighters and stuff. So they really care about, like the collection of the museum and continuing to like share their story. So my projects were working on like these teacher resources for fire prevention safeties and teaching about not just stop, drop, and roll, but like kind of some other things to learn about checking smoke detectors and other stuff. So they were really excited to hear about these new things I developed that was kind of pushing fire safety forward for teachers. So that was a really positive experience, and I'm glad that was my first one. And so far, really my only one. In the positions that I've been at museums, I haven't had a lot of board kind of interfacing. It's something that I submit reports and I submit pictures and numbers, but I'm not really the one who presents them, or I'm not the one who does the FaceTime with the board. Um, but in my experience, I feel like there's kind of two different types of boards, and maybe there's some mixing in between. But I feel like there's the type of boards, I mean, they're all volunteer, but I feel like there's the type of boards that are formed because you're seeking financial resources and you want people on your board that have a lot of money that they're able to donate and to use connections to find more donations for your organization. Um, and then I think there's boards that don't focus on that finance goal and focus more on kind of, yeah, representation and a wide range of experience, I guess. And as someone who does not have a lot of inheritance or something to give out, that's kind of the board opportunities that I am seeking is places that are looking at my experience and expertise as something that I'm contributing rather than dollars. And you can do both it too, of course. But and that's where it's like I mean, everything's on a spectrum, but I see boards as kind of on a spectrum. And those are kind of your two. You're looking at funds, you're looking at experience, you're looking at connections as kind of different things that someone can give to an organization and volunteer in a place on a board. Um, so, for example, with the Museum Council, I'm hoping to bring some of my programming experience and some of my connections with other educators and programmers to the table to be able to support more social and networking events for them.
As somebody who works in like it within an organization, is interfacing more directly with the board something that um you would like more of? Is that something you think boards should like do? Like what's your sort of idea on that?
Oh yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, I get obviously that they're like if you're on a board, you're volunteering for that. That's not your full-time, situations. Like I get that if you're on a board, you're busy. But I wish there was just more invitations to meetings. I wish there was a little bit more of that kind of transparency and communication, even if there's not time for me to, sit and shake hands with everybody at the table kind of a thing. Um, I wish I knew, their names and their perspectives on life a little bit more. I feel like if you're in those meeting spaces and hearing what they're saying, even if you don't build a direct relationship with them, you're learning more about what their thoughts are. And I think it would be a good kind of professional development opportunity. But I get that sometimes they don't want too many people in the room. I get that there's sometimes there's decisions they don't want shared with the entire organization yet in some types of those meetings. Um, but I think sometimes, and this is the part where I'm kind of iffy on, and I feel like virtually you can have a lot of people in a space without feeling like it's too many people in the room kind of a situation. Like I
Mm.
get if we're all in person and there's like 30 people sitting and watching and not contributing to the meeting because they're just like listening could feel weird. But I feel like in a Zoom, an online capacity, it's a lot easier to have kind of just bystanders in the meeting,
Yeah.
who just want to learn information and kind of absorb.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think they're um I think you hit on something that's like the really the like professional development side of like sort of
Mm,
nurturing your staff in that way by a, sort of having that connection to the board. I think is something that um I don't know if it gets talked about really when it comes to like um conversations about the board, because I think um yeah, you like kind of you I think painted that picture very well of like the different types of boards um
mhm.
versus the like sort of financially driven board versus the like experiential board. And that professional development piece like gets maybe lost in the shuffle a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like professional development, like conferences and like workshops and like talks are our go-tos.
Mhm.
It's like, okay, and there's so much professional development I think can happen that doesn't have a monetary cost.
Mm.
Like, yeah, there's lots of things that you got to sign up for because you need to pay honorariums for, the people that are talking and different things. But I think examples of like getting to look at budgets or like being in the room, when it's an extra invitation can be really helpful.
Yeah. um yeah, that makes me kind of like wonder like in your experience as a person with a disability, um trying to navigate your own professional development, um
Hmm.
like how has like what has that experience been like, sort of balancing um your like your access needs, your identity, and also trying to further your career to step into a more like leadership role.
Yeah. So I'm actually really lucky. My first in-person conference was the lead conference that we went to this summer. Just to the timing of the pandemic and for context, I finished graduate school December 2019. So like
Mm.
right before the pandemic hit. I was
Mhm.
working full time at the Museum of the American Revolution. So I was doing some full-time work in kind of those months like between before it started and also in the fall. But just how the timing worked out. Actually, I think I went to the first in-person lead conference, the one at the Friends Center.
Mm.
But that was a smaller scale compared to lead for sure, because it was just kind of Philly folks rather than like all over the country. Um, but anyways, lead was the first big in-person one I gone to in a while. And I was so grateful for it because it was just such a comfortable space. At the beginning of every session, they were always, I mean, they had their captions and interpreters and stuff, but I love that they were always like, sit on the floor if you need to, pace the room if you need to, like do whatever you need to be comfy and listen to this talk kind of thing. And it's hard for me to sit in a chair at a table with my laptop in front of me, for that whole day. So yeah, I did go sit down and sit up against the wall on some of them or sit crisscross on the floor. I love sitting on the floor. So that's something yeah, exactly. You're in
Yeah.
prime comfy spot right now.
Yes.
Um, able to be invited to do that every time. Like, I'm not going to be able to do that. And, like, feel comfy in other conferences I'm gonna go to. Like I'm gonna sit at the table the whole time kind of thing. So I was really glad to have that experience and like the quiet rooms and stuff to just kind of decompress because there was a lot of people there. And I mean, I'm glad there was a lot of people there and to learn and network, but it was overwhelming for sure. And I was tired after. Um, I think also staying in the same hotel as the conference venue was key for me there. And being able to take some breaks and go back to my own space and decompress for half an hour between sessions was nice.
What you're highlighting is um just that like professional development and preparing uh for a leadership position just looks different if you're a person with a disability. I think there is a particular track for professional development that sort of gets taught, maybe in the sort of larger context of like, oh, you go to networking events and you join these like you join these like networks and groups of people, and you host all these things and you have these like conversations with people. And I think that sort of implies a level of ability and yeah, ability, a certain like way of thinking, a way of being that maybe isn't accessible to a lot of different people.
Hmm.
So it's like it's this question of like how do we like how do we create spaces for professional development for people with disabilities so that we can fill leadership roles and approach leadership in a new way?
Yeah, networking events being a staple of, like obviously connections are important and making those connections, but it's difficult having a disability with those networking events. For me, there's sometimes I have an event planned, it's in my calendar, I'm excited for it, I want to go, and then I have an anxiety attack that day, and I'm all of a sudden you're like, this sounds now like the worst thing I could possibly do today. When 24 hours before, like I was texting my friend being like, I can't wait to see you tomorrow, and like talk and grab drinks at the thing at this museum. So it definitely sucks when it comes in moments like that where you can't or feel like you can't or you don't want to do something, anymore. And then you kind of gain some fear of that too, it's for me, anxiety is very cyclical. It's a big vicious cycle. But it's like then I'm like, oh man, next time am I gonna flake? I don't want to keep being this person who flakes on stuff, kind of thing. And is it gonna happen again? And it probably will, but um yeah, it's network events are tough for me. I like the concept of them, but in practice it doesn't always happen for me. I'd say I end up like 50% of the time I'm like, okay, I can do this. I can go and be like my best self like at a networking event.
Yeah. No, I I totally feel that. And like and it really does like it really is like about how the event is crafted too, right? Cuz like
Mhm.
I think there's so much that can go into the that just the design of the event and the prep and the like preparing materials um
Mhm.
for the event. Like so much of that can be like um designed in a way that, won't mitigate um won't mitigate every single challenge or question that sort of enters the mind, or that, like, it's not going to it's not going to be able to change everything, but it can make things um
Mhm.
more, it can lower the like lift for entry
Mhm.
in ways that like make it a bit more open um
Yeah,
for different people, and that is huge. And
absolutely. Yeah, I think pre-visit materials are huge for like kind of a universal design component that help a lot of people of a variety of different um abilities and just kind of like what's to be expected, what's going to be on the menu, what's the
mhm,
seating situation going to be like I don't need a 360 scan of the entire venue, but um and I think some of that comes down to planning and preparation, like, I mean, I'm a program planner, so yeah, I do last minute stuff sometimes too. Like, I get it, some things are on the fly, but as much as you can, like, kind of put on your event page or on your ticket page or in your reminder email, like in advance, I think is a critical component that isn't a monetary lift at all. Is just a time lift and an energy lift.
mhm. Have you I'm curious, like, what kinds of like, if you've like found any particular like networking or professional development opportunities. You mentioned lead, but any others um that um maybe support uh you and like, and your identity as a person with a disability and other identities, like, what
Mm.
what professional development and what leadership development opportunities, like, have you tapped into that have been there to support you, and how has that made a difference?
Yeah, so the other group I mean Museum Council is a supportive for me just because I have so many friends now in this group. So even though I'm not necessarily like, I mean, the organization, and hopefully as programming chair I want to improve some of the accessibility of the organization. Um but just being in a space where a lot of my close friends are also there, like that in itself is a comfort for me. I feel like a lot of the people there know that I have anxiety just because I'm friends with them also in my personal life, as personal and professional, relationships with these people. Another space that I've found comfort in is there is a group called Trans Work, as part of the Independence Business Alliance. It's through like the Philly Chamber of Commerce or something like that. It's like a group, but and they do, yeah, different social and networking events and also panels and stuff. They did like a fashion show at William Way. So yeah, that's been a cool space too. I've been to like, like a formal dining kind of like place, but like everyone's, queer. So they're wearing like super fun, it's not like a big stuffy black tie kind of event. Um, so those have been fun to go to. I haven't made a ton of friends in those spaces yet, but just being in a space where people are like you and that they're gender nonconforming is kind of nice. So that's been a cool opportunity. I've just started going to their events within the last like couple months or so. So they're new on my radar, but definitely interested in looking, and they look at nonprofit and corporate. They're kind of just like trans workers in Philly as a whole, regardless of kind of what field you're in.
Does your organization or organizations that you've worked for, like, are there like implicit or explicit rules that you feel like you have to conform to um when it comes to how you present yourself um within your job, and like, how has that been affected by um like, how do you navigate that in addition to also keeping your access needs in mind?
Yeah. It's definitely changed depending on what organization I've been at. I think at the Brandywine right now, I think at the Brandywine, because we're also a conservancy and we have a lot of gardeners and like other staff, there's like different levels of like implicit dress code for people. Like the gardeners can wear whatever they want because they're out in the field, you know? And then as educators, we're on the move a lot. You know, I'm moving art supplies and setting things up. So we can dress a little more casual than like the development office kind of does. Like the marketing and the development and like the business admin kind of side, I think dress more formal than we do, which is nice. Um, but I've been at institutions before where they've been very strict about clothing and, you know, sending an email at the end of the day of like, you know, people shouldn't wear XYZ. And you're like, well, I was wearing that today, so I guess that email was directed towards me kind of situation. You know, those kind of things that it's like, did that really affect anyone's productivity or, you know, like mood during the day? It wasn't anything offensive or, you know, something like
Yeah.
completely inappropriate. I personally am like very casual about it. I think, you know, as long as you're presentable. I've also struggled a lot with being non-binary and makeup in the workplace.
Mm.
There were places that I worked at that felt more formal, so I felt like I needed to have makeup on more regularly as someone who can be female presenting. Um, but if I'm feeling a little more, you know, mask and I'm kind of gender fluid in that sense, sometimes I dress more mask and sometimes I dress more femme. And when I'm dressing more mask, I definitely don't want to put makeup on because that just doesn't feel like what fits with how I'm feeling. But then you're struggling because you're like, do I look, you know, like I'm being a lazy woman who doesn't put on makeup for work? Or, you know, am I feeling comfortable in my identity by dressing in this way, kind of a thing. And that's something I never got direct commentary on and was that was just like a in my head kind of a thing.
Yeah. But yeah, that's it for today.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for making an open and comfy space for me. I had a good time.
Good. Yeah. I'm
No,
really
it's
glad.
chill.
Yeah.
And we'll need to get coffee or a drink or something outside of this so I can learn more about you too.
Yes. Please, like absolutely. A
We're gonna come out
thousand
of this and you'll
percent.
be like, I know Bailey's life story down to the T. And I'm gonna be like, I know Adrienne's from California and
Yeah, you're right. We'll do a whole like story swap and I'll be like, all right, this is my life.
here's my life story.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll
Perfect.
let you go for the rest of your Friday.
Bye,
Enjoy.
everyone.
Bye.